I'd like to call to order the City Council and Planning Commission agenda special joint session for Tuesday, October the 18th, 2022. And would also at this time like to call upon our Planning Commission and Mr. Friends, you can open your meeting. Okay, I want our record to show that everyone is present with the exception of Councilmember Lopez and Councilmember Alvarado.
For the Planning Commission, we have everyone present except for Vice Chairman Nunless and Commissioner Wiebe.
Okay, we'll move on to the approval of agenda for council.
Make a motion to approve agenda as read.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Roll call.
Mayor Pro Tem Givens,
Yes.
Espinoza,
Yes.
and Prout.
Yes.
Okay, Planning Commission will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda.
Commissioner Sanchez,
Aye.
Olvera,
Yes.
and Friends.
Aye.
Okay, public comment. Anyone in the audience care to address the council may come forward at this time. Hearing none, we will close public comment time, and I don't think you're gonna have any either, so
I don't
we
think
just have
so.
staff out there.
Yeah.
So we'll move on to management reports. The item for tonight is a joint city council planning commission workshop. And manager,
Certainly, Mayor and Council, members of the Planning Commission, this item before you this evening is a study session in which we will cover numerous topics related to building and planning, which is a mutual interest of both bodies. We'll be covering ADUs, accessory dwelling units, junior ADUs. We'll be talking about RV parking and driveways. We'll be covering also corner reverse lots. This is informational in which we'll be presenting information to you, seeking your input, your dialogue in terms of what we may want to do from a policy stance or not. So this is an item that was presented to the regular city council under a previous public hearing item that we felt was best to bring this back to you and the Planning Commission as a informational item to get input versus asking you to make changes to the ordinance without going through that process. So with that, if you recall some of the topics that we will be talking about, you heard that night because we did open the public hearing, staff made the presentation, and we continued that item until I believe the December, first meeting in December. So with tonight's presentation and any direction and input, we will bring that item back to close the public hearing of what any changes, if there are any. We're not in a position to that we are making hard recommendations of what we should be making those changes or not. So with that, we will have both our planning manager, Steve, and our building official, Dennis Filler, that will be tag teaming the presentation. And then, of course, we ask that you provide input, engages. This is an interactive process, so you don't have to wait until the end. So with that, I'll go ahead and have Steve begin the presentation.
Yes, thank you. Honorable Council and Commission. My name is Steve Esselman. I'm the Planning Director, and tonight we're having an informational meeting about a number of planning items that are on the docket for the Planning Department, as well as a bit more depth talk about the zoning ordinance changes that we had proposed at a previous meeting. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. And so, thank you. So just to give you an outline, we're going to talk a little bit first about the housing element update. That is the update that is currently occurring here with our consulted infrastructure engineers. We're then going to move on to a brief discussion about the environmental justice element that is also currently being prepared. Then we're going to move into a topic regarding a program EIR and how we would like to approach a few of these planning documents and the ultimate CEQA document that would be necessary for those planning documents. We're then going to go shift into a little bit about the possibility of entertaining a general plan update here in the near future and getting your feedback on that possibility. And then finally, we're going to go back to the ordinance revisions that we talked about at the last council meeting. So with that, we're going to move right into the housing element update. So our housing element update is due to the state by January of 2024. We're currently working on that, including doing the outreach and building some of the early chapters of that document. In fact, we had a meeting earlier this week with our consultant to sort of keep us on track. We generally have a bi-weekly meeting with our consultants to make sure that we're moving along with the housing element update. Some of the high level things about a housing element update, it has to accommodate something called the regional housing needs allocation. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a moment. It also requires something called the sites inventory. Again, we'll talk a little bit more. It does require adherence to something called the affirmatively furthering fair housing concept, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Per Senate Bill 1000, a safety element is also required upon the next housing element update revision, and we're currently preparing that safety element in-house. It's something that you can generally do with existing information, and so it's something that we didn't feel that a consultant was necessary to complete. So let's get right into what's RHNA. It's kind of one of those big concepts of the housing element update. It essentially means the regional housing needs allocation. And it is broken down into 4 categories: very low, low, moderate, and above moderate housing categories. The numbers, which we'll see in a moment, are developed by the current Council of Governments as required per state law. Every municipal planning organization, such as KernCog, develops these numbers for each municipality and the county for which they are a part. Now, the state law recognizes that local governments play a vital role in developing affordable housing, and the RHNA is a tool to help us achieve that goal. And it also, state law mandates that all California cities, towns, and counties plan for the housing needs regardless of income. So for us, I did a little bit of work, and I figured out essentially kind of what our RHNA is based on these categories. Our area median income is $54,000 and some change in 2020 dollars. So our very low to moderate to above moderate kind of fall into these various ranges. Within our previous housing element, because there is always a housing element that is active for any municipality, and they are updated on a regular cycle, and we're now in the 6th cycle of the housing element update. The previous regional housing needs allocation numbers are as you see. This is for 2015 through 23. These are our new numbers that have been recently finalized and adopted by KernCog. As you can see, our total is a need of 3,294 total homes. To give you kind of a sense of the differences between the previous housing element and the new housing element, the previous required 2,036 homes, and the new housing element update RHNA numbers include 3,294 homes, or units rather, which is a 60% increase in total units. And just to give you kind of a sense of, and I'll go back real quick on those numbers. Oh, sorry, pushed the wrong one. We go back to those numbers. We actually believe that the moderate and above moderate can actually already be accomplished with our existing specific plan areas. So our areas of concern right now are how do we get low and very low income homes into the geography of Shafter. Let me go back here. So now we're going to talk about something else called the sites inventory. Currently, we are working on a sites inventory. Basically, it's an exercise, it's a GIS exercise of figuring out where we could likely put houses into the Shafter geography. We basically figure out suitable and available lands by different income categories. The sites inventory for the housing element update drives the need possibly for general plan amendments and zone changes down the line, because perhaps there are areas such as Wonderful has provided some information about potential sites that are currently agricultural land. So if we were to eventually make them housing to accommodate our regional housing needs allocation, we would have to do general plan amendments and zone changes, possibly one big one, to change various land uses to land uses that can allow for by right residential units. In order to do this, because these lands are owned by private owners, we're going to have to do some sort of an outreach to determine if there are owners that are willing to include some of their sites or lands and parcels as part of this sites inventory. As I said, we've already had some initial conversations with Wonderful, and they've pointed out some fairly large tracts of land where they are thinking in the future that they would like to have residential housing. Now, just to give you a sense of what is called affirmatively furthering fair housing, it's kind of, one, it's a tongue twister. It's very difficult to get out of your mouth. But secondarily, it was initially a federal HUD requirement. But with the passage of Assembly Bill 686, it has now become a state requirement, a California state requirement. Essentially, what it does is you have to identify sites, first of all, to accommodate the regional housing needs allocation. But you also have to develop living patterns where low-income homes are essentially not concentrated in one location or in a few locations, but instead are spread throughout the community. And so that's basically what affirmatively furthering fair housing is essentially making sure that you have done a good faith effort in sprinkling a number of different housing types throughout the community instead of just sort of concentrating them in certain areas. The hope there is that it transforms racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty into areas of opportunity. This is direct language from state law, and that and therefore the land use patterns must distribute units of each residential income category throughout the city. So that's what essentially affirmatively furthering fair housing means. And that's a concept that HCD is very much pinpointing in this housing element update. And if you have not done a good faith effort in doing this exercise, they will reject your housing element. So like I said, we've been talking to our consultant, and we've determined that we have to do a few community outreach meetings. This is actually one of them, and so we're gonna count this meeting as our first community outreach meeting. We'll have it, as part of the housing element update, but there are other meetings that are necessary. So one possible meeting that we're thinking of is maybe having again, another special meeting here on November 15th, next month at 4 p.m. at City Hall, where we would bring in our consultant and we would talk specifically and get really into the weeds about the housing element update itself and solicit your feedback, your thoughts as we craft the housing element. Currently, we're just working on the sort of initial chapters, sort of the introductory chapters. But before we get into the real meat of the document, we would like to have your input on how you would like to see that go. There's also the possibility of having some sort of a pop-up event at one of our holiday extravaganzas here in the city, where we would have someone out, and basically provide information to the community and solicit feedback on how they would like to see their community grow and develop during this current housing element update. There are other outreach efforts, and we've already received some draft documents that Rachel has been gracious enough to review as community engagement manager. That includes developing a website that would be a link to our website that would go to a different website to provide information, including a needs survey. We would also provide documentation on our website as we develop documents, whether they're draft or not, so that people can review and have access to them. And we're also hoping to have some brochures that we can filter out to the community so people have the opportunity to know where the website is, who they can call, and provide their comments. And finally, we're going to do a utility insert in our water bill so that we can get it out to all of our water customers, and then they can also have that information available to them on how they can be a part of the housing element update. Now, why are we doing all this? Housing element updates before this last cycle didn't have a lot of teeth. You could usually do them in-house. You did a good faith effort. You changed some of you updated the RENA numbers. Maybe you dusted off the policies. You sent it back to the state, and you were done. Well, the state now has more policing power over housing elements. The state has actually created a housing and accountability and enforcement unit under the Department of HCD, who are the ones that actually review our housing elements. They have the power to investigate local jurisdictions and to enforce state housing laws if we don't comply with housing law, including decertifying housing elements. This enforcement authority is based on a passage of Assembly Bill 72 and Assembly Bill 215, and has now been codified under various government codes. This authority includes, but is not limited to, housing element law, ADU law, as you guys have heard about quite a bit recently, as well as the Surplus Land Act. So this is kind of my first policy discussion that at some point I'm going to need input from both the council and the commission about how they would like to go with this. And essentially, it's a policy discussion on whether we going forward would like to include inclusionary zoning and make inclusionary zoning part of our zoning ordinance. What is inclusionary zoning? Essentially, inclusionary zoning are policies that require developers to reserve a percentage of housing units for very low, and moderate housing in new developments. Essentially, when let's say a development agreement comes in, if we had inclusionary zoning, there would be a certain percentage where we would say 20% of your homes have to meet a certain income category, and it would be required. Therefore, in every housing development, 20% may be reserved for low and very low income households. That's essentially what inclusionary zoning is. And so one of the questions planning has is that something that the city wants to consider and possibly adopt, which is inclusionary zoning policies going forward in order to meet our RENA numbers? Don't need an answer today. It's just a question that I am posing to all of you now to mull about and to think about, and because we're going to be bringing this topic up again at later dates.
Steve, if I may, sure. Mayor and Council, Planning Commissioners, I think this is a good time to pause, maybe have some dialogue with you in terms of this particular policy discussion regarding inclusionary housing. This oftentimes is a topic of heavy discussion between cities, developers, because the development community typically, when they go to build homes, they want all their housing, obviously, for market rate, right? I mean, that's where they run their pro forma. They calculate what the number of homes will generate in terms of profit, et cetera, et cetera. And so they're not particularly a fan of having inclusionary housing, because then that requires that a certain percentage, as Steve said here, up to 20-30% of their housing. So let's say that it's 100 homes. That means that 20 or 30 of those homes would have to be on the low income side, the very low and the low income. And they're deed restricted, which means that those homes would have to stay in those income levels for a definite period of time. So even if the property owner who buys that home goes to sell the home, they have to sell that home to a other family that's very low income that falls within that category. It's not one of those things that the person that buys it and then 10 years later they sell the home, now it goes back to market rate. Now it's deed restricted. That has to be in that. So that's for that reason, developers are not fans of inclusionary housing. Alternatively, cities at a policy level can consider adopting an in lieu fee for inclusionary housing. So instead of requiring a developer to build certain number of those homes for very low income housing, that there's a fee that the developer pays for each of those units. So we had a 15%, let's say we do 20%, there's a fee that they would pay for each of those homes. So instead of building 20 of those homes to be in those income categories, they would pay $2,000 per each of those units. All right. So if we take the example, and I'm just throwing some numbers here, that it's 20% of 100 projected homes, the 20%, that's 20 homes would have to be times 2,000. So that's, do the math, that's about what, $40,000 that they would pay in fees that then the city collects and puts it into a housing fund. Okay. But that means that at some point, the city then either is gonna build or get into the housing business, or if there's a low income project, a multifamily project or some low income project being proposed that a developer wants to come in, we can use those monies, that 40,000 towards the project. That's similar to when we had redevelopment agencies and 20% of the of the tax increment had to be set aside for low moderate income housing. And there was a different pot for that. And that was the purpose behind that particular set aside for that. So that in lieu fee for inclusionary housing, we can address in one or two ways. We can put it as part of the development that the developer has to build so many units for that. Or we come up with a fee that they pay in lieu of, but then that puts the burden on the city to eventually help a developer, low-income builder build housing that helps us meet our RENA numbers in the very low and low-income categories. If you look at our categories, based on what our projected new numbers are, you're talking about 1,100 units in those two categories. I think the very low income is about 600 plus units, and then the low income is another 400 units. Our concern is that HCD and the task force that they now formed, and the state has thrown quite a bit of money to the task force, and the task force is going around enforcing the housing elements. They're enforcing growth restricted policies or ordinances from cities that say we're only going to permit 200 homes and nothing more. And once those 200 homes come in, so all of that, they've deemed that cities can no longer do that. Our concern is that when we go to submit our housing element, that this is the one area that the state is going to come back and question us in terms of what are we really doing, more than just at a policy level that says this is what we're going to try to attempt to do to build affordable housing. They simply won't approve it, and they may just force our hand, either adopt inclusionary policies, whether it's in the development or a fee or something else like that. So I know we're just now presenting this, but it might be helpful for us in terms of how you see that possibly kind of being developed or formulating in terms of meeting those RENA numbers, because that is a concern where, as Steve said, currently we are meeting the market rate and the above, but in the low and very low is our weakness, if you will.
Who sets the inclusionary housing percentage? What's that? Is it us who come up with the minimum?
It's a policy.
Yes.
It's a policy decision that we do at the local level.
We were just giving you generally, if someone has inclusionary housing, generally their policy is 20 to 30%, but you can choose whatever percentage you want, provided that we can justify that it will meet the RENA numbers.
Which are the numbers presented earlier, correct?
Correct. Yes. That second set of numbers are what are our current RENA numbers that our housing element has to accommodate.
How does the self-help developments offset or make that up?
So that's what, 40 units, Dennis?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
pretty high over there. That's
So-
a big development for us.
So those typically would fall in the very low or the low income.
Right, but percentage wise for inclusionary, I mean, is that a plus or should we have more of it?
No, so inclusionary is for when there's market rate development being proposed. So some of the track maps that we have that,
Okay.
let's say it's Lennar, I'm not saying our current Lennar,
But
but a
that's
national
fine.
builder like that,
Mhm.
right? And they're coming in with a plan to build 100 homes, then that it would apply to them, because we would be saying anywhere between 10, 15, 20, 30% of those homes have to be in this income level, right? Self-help, they're already considered a low-income builder.
Right,
So those automatically just count towards the RENA numbers in the very low and the low income numbers that we have to meet.
They're voluntarily doing 100%.
But you still have to have the inclusion in the other developments than.
Yeah, it's more for the market rate,
I understand.
of builders.
But it does not touch previous tracks. Tracks that have been approved may not have been built. Correct?
Correct. And I think that's where we get into the vesting, non-vesting, and where those maps have been done. Right.
Oh, really?
But you could state in inclusionary ordinance what you wanted to apply to and not apply to. If you don't say anything, then some tracks, even though they may have already been approved, might be subject to it, depending on how long it takes to report.
I have a question, just for clarification. Let's say I'm a developer, want to develop some homes. And in order not to develop low income, there's a fee I would have to pay? Or,
That's an alternative. So we can do an in lieu fee,
uh-huh,
which says 2,000 per home, and then the developer just pays that fee.
so then I continue doing what my master plan is.
Right. So in that example, I said, let's say it's 100 homes at market rate. And instead of having an inclusionary policy that says 15% of the homes.
Right, and
have
then
to
the
be-
city at some point is gonna have so much funding that would be used to develop something somewhere as a low income, we're using that
Let's-
money for that, right?
Let's say self-help proposing another project, right? It's another 40 homes. We can use that 40,000 we just collected from the private builder and apply it towards the self-help project. It can go towards offsetting some of their fees. It can be for some of the offsite improvements, wherever it may be. That would be our contribution to that. Or back, some years back when there was quite a bit of money put out by the state in tax credits for affordable builders, that was the means for them to be able to do that. We would be able to use those funds towards a project. Let's say it was an apartment complex for affordable housing, then whatever monies we had available, we can put those monies towards it.
So I'm a developer and I'm willing to make the low income housing, but there's no supplemental of my loss. There's not a program that way, right? A reversed.
Unless there's tax credits. That's typically how developers may be able to get some of that offset. I mean, in terms of a financial contribution directly from whether it's a state or feds, usually it's through a tax credit program in which these developers help get lowered their costs a little bit lower.
Cause then for me personally, there's two ways of looking at this. You have a house, low income housing scattered. Sometimes it blends things in
Mhm.
where you have, unless having one pocket of a community sub area that you just have a whole bunch of low income. And that creates just different, just things
Yeah.
that get more challenging, but scattering, I think would be the idea, but again, I don't know. I'm not a developer, but I don't
Right.
know. Developer doesn't get into that business to lose money, so.
And that is one of the things that you're right, with inclusionary housing, one house, it may be in the very low income to the next house. It's not like one's built for low income and the other one's not. It's standard, whatever the floor plans are and the aesthetics of it, that's what they build. It's just deed restricted for low or very low.
And that the developer will lose money. Developers don't like it because that is an issue where that is going to hit their pocketbook.
Yeah, but
Because
if
the
it
way
was-
they sell the home and how they have to build the home and how they have to track the home is very different from a typical buyer to a deed restricted low income.
But if there was some program for the developer to supplement that loss, and I think we'll jump on that. Isn't Freedom Home Track has that mixture? The Freedom Home? There's some low income and then,
Mhm.
no? Okay.
Typically what a developer like a Lennar is they'll partner with an affordable housing builder. They themselves won't develop
And just give them the land.
and give them the land and they'll
Yep.
say, here, you build it. Because, affordable housing builders know how to go after certain tax credits, their profit or the pro forma, I mean, that's their business. So a national builder typically won't be the one kind of doing that. If it's an apartment complex, they'll typically partner with an affordable housing builder for that component of it.
It theoretically does cost more to build a low income home than it does to build a typical moderate home. Just because of the laws and the hoops that they have jumped through for it. For us, every time we've looked at tracks, it's better to sell the land or give the land to someone else and let them just deal with it because it's just too much of a nightmare. too much of a legal hassle.
All right, well, unless any other questions, I'll go ahead and move on. Go ahead.
So 20 to 30% of the homes are gonna be sprinkled throughout the 100 homes that are built in this one particular, to speak, site. I mean, they're gonna be in a part of it, or they're gonna be sprinkled out, because people are not gonna buy houses. They're not gonna want to buy a $400,000 or $500,000 house next to a $120,000 house.
Yeah, you won't know the difference. I think what Councilmember Alvarado was clarifying, that it's the same house, is just deed restricted. So when the builder is trying to market that house and people are applying, they may be asking, and depending on where the income levels are and the criteria that they have, is you may qualify, I may qualify for 500,000, but somebody else, their income levels aren't going to qualify in the part. They'll say, oh, well, you fall under this, and we have inclusionary housing for affordable housing in the low or very low. And you meet the income levels in that slide that Steve had. You have to meet those income levels to qualify for those homes within those categories. But to the point is, the house itself, right, doesn't look any different in terms of the $500,000 house to the very low or low income house. It's just, you have to meet the minimum income, medium income levels to qualify as a low income or very low income.
And another way to offset this is through potentially density bonuses. You build a certain number of low-income homes, we'll give you a density bonus for your at-rate market houses. Essentially give you the ability to put more homes into the geography than what would be allowed normally by zoning through a sort of a density bonus program. And we have currently a density bonus program with our zoning ordinance. It's just it's not used very often.
Yeah, so for example, a parcel, a 1 acre parcel, we might say, without the inclusionary housing, it's 6 lots per acre, right? Well, if we're asking you to do inclusionary housing, then the density bonus points, to what Steve's saying, we may reduce the lot size and say, oh, well, now you can build up to 10 homes on that 1 acre parcel. So now you're getting, you're building inclusionary, but you can build another 4 homes that would be at market rate. And that's sort of a way for them to offset their costs. That's that density bonus. That's an example of that, with how that works.
You made a comment earlier about municipalities creating policy or having policy that almost restricts the amount of homes being built in general.
Yeah, some cities have had with growth ordinances. Typically you see this where, they want to measure their growth. So they say, okay, we're only going to permit in the past, 200 homes, right? And so HCD has deemed that those type of policies are no longer, you can't do that, basically. Yeah.
How does the HCD battle their sister department in water when cities don't have water available?
There's not consideration for that.
Well,
That I'm aware of, but
yeah, so, I guess that's the question. There have been case law that has confirmed HCD's interpretation about those cap limits. For example, I was dealing with a specific plan earlier in the week that had, for example, a limit on the total number of dwelling units that could be built in a specific plan area of like 1,200 units. And so there was recent case law that says that those caps, whether it's a overall cap or a density cap that Gabriel's talking about, are preempted by state law. So then the issue of how then the city look at a situation like that, there are specific reasons in all of these laws that are being passed by the legislature that allow you to deny an application, but they're extremely narrow. What the phrase that's used is specific adverse impact, and they define that very, very, very narrow. Water might apply if you had a specific limitation on, for example, I like to use vacuum know, back in the late eighties, there was a limit on the number of permits that could be issued in Malibu because of the sewer capacity. And so that was in a court order. Well, that would be an example of a situation where, yeah, if you have that, a specific adverse impact, then it's possible to craft some findings that allow you to deny certain actions. But it's very difficult to do that language of finding.
Okay.
It's not like in the past where you could rely on, well, it's inconsistent with the general plan and it's, you know, it's incompatible with those types of findings are out the window. You can't use it.
Yeah, I believe the legislation that's come out, health and safety, but as Mark said, that threshold is very, very high. And even if we develop a well-written policy on that or findings, HCD can still deem it, it's not justifiable and ultimately still sue the city. And there's been case studies on that as well.
So there's not a whole lot of choices, huh?
No, that's, again, I'm not pointing fingers, but this is the wonderful state of California's legislature furthering their policy agenda and what they believe is addressing homeless issues or, excuse me, politically unhoused individuals is by building more homes, that somehow that it's going to resolve the homeless issue.
So you're not even considered low income if you're just starting out. You're a young person, you're just starting out and your income could be in that very low or even as you go up to the low level.
Yeah.
And yet you're going to expand yourself. Because you're going to get yourself established and you're going to be able to move on. Would that be allowed as a low income? to Start out?
Can you go back to sleep?
I'm actually, can you, for some reason?
Somebody
this
go
isn't
back to
working.
that slide, please. The one with that had the income levels,
Sure.
just so that whoever may be watching can see this.
There you go.
Yeah. So you would have to fall within these income levels to qualify
Now-
in either very low, low, moderate, or above market.
Now, let's say you bought and you were at the very low and 10 years goes by and you obviously go out of that. Well, you still own the home. It's not until the home is sold. It's got to be sold to someone who is in that sort of same bracket.
So then it restricts what I can sell it for.
Yes.
But to your comment about a young family starting,
Yeah.
like a starter
Uh-huh.
home, right? They would have to fall within these categories. So let's say they're both working, dual income household, and they would have to fall within these ranges. If they're above that, regardless if this is their first home and they're starting off, if they don't qualify, they don't qualify for these categories. But let's say that today, they buy the house because they fall within the low, which is the 27,043. But they're in their 10 years, and 10 years from now they're doubled their income. Well,
Mhm.
it doesn't disqualify them because at the time that they bought it, they meet the criteria to qualify.
Right, but I couldn't sell it for more because then it raises the level.
You would have to sell it to another family that is in these income levels,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah, so.
Yeah.
That doesn't equate. Because you got to start out somewhere.
Mhm.
And what do you do then is you can. Whether you're married or unmarried or, dual incomes or whatever, it just doesn't seem right.
And back in the day, just really when like with RDA and low mod housing, and you had first time home buyer programs, in that scenario, if, 10 years later, they sold the home,
Mhm.
there was clauses in those agreements that, determined how that equity was split. Some of it came back to the city and then the city put that into a revolving housing loan program. And that's how they were able to do more down payment assistance loans for other families. So they used some of that equity to coming back to fund future revolving housing fund.
And those houses ever turn into rentals?
No, they're deed restricted. It has to be owner occupied. mostly,
Yeah,
you know.
see, they're really strapped in it. I mean, they're-
It's not to say that so then, you would have to have a program manager that, you'd have to make sure that the person that is there is still there and they have to recertify on and so forth. But typically, I mean, we have no way of knowing who's in there, someone can be there 2 years and there has been instances in some cities I've been at in which you later find out, oh, it's been a rental. It's like, what? You know, but yeah, it does create some issues. So. Just, so on that, we'll, you know, we wanted to present that information. Obviously something we'll be bringing back to you, but I think that it will be something that we need to give some serious consideration at a policy level, for our, housing element update, when we go to finalize that. So, Mayor, if I may through you, ask if any of the planning commissioners have any thought on this particular.
Oh, yeah,
topic.
they're welcome to speak up in any.
Yeah, I can't turn to them, but, so I was going through you if they had any questions, asking them.
I do have one. Has the city done any or completed any research as far as other cities who have implemented this type of policy and what impact they have encountered with developers or you know, with any of this type of inclusionary zoning?
And Steve, you want to?
No, we have not.
Okay.
No, we haven't looked at any data. We simply have been talking in talks with our housing element update consultant, that this was one of the things that they have said that a lot of cities use, and that, you know, and I said I would broach it with you guys just to sort of get your feel on it, because it is a popular tool for meeting your RENA numbers. But no, we haven't gotten into like actually do some real research, but we certainly can do that, you know, going forward and moving on along with our housing element update. We're going to be doing a lot of analysis on those sorts of things.
Just.
Right.
I'm just saying, when we got started, when I was young and all, we got started, I mean, it paid us to get into a lower cost house until we could situate ourselves and move up. But at least it wasn't restricted with everything they're putting on it. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the part that I'm bothered with it.
And it does create heartburn. That's why it's
Yeah.
a very delicate subject, if you will, that, you know, from a policy in terms of how we're crafting. If I may just add a comment to Commissioner, I think it was Commissioner Olvera. I think what we would find in our research that it varies from cities. You're not going to find that it's consistent, that each city will either have an inclusionary housing policy for housing development projects. It's going to be a mixture of things between the in lieu fee or inclusionary housing, but I think it just depends on that particular city. Oftentimes it's based on geographical area where that city may be. If land is scarce, and the
Yeah.
city doesn't want to get into the housing business, affordable housing business, they typically would lean more to inclusionary housing. And then but I think we would find a mix of bags of either probably 50% of each, more or less. I can tell you my experience with it, developers tend to favor or lean more towards the in lieu fee, because it's easier for them to just pay a fee than it is to do the inclusionary housing. And the negotiations, the discussions then that take place is what's that dollar amount of the fee that is going to be paid by the developer, right? But that's been my experience when developing inclusionary housing policies or ordinances.
So basically, in the end, cities are going to have to deal with it where they didn't before, because now we're going to be required. So that probably takes care of that question, because it will affect all cities. And to be fair, I mean, we've always discussed having homes here that were of different value and different sizes so that everybody could start out somewhere. Yeah, and I mean, we all know that others didn't, other cities didn't, and so it's caused it to come to this. It's unfortunate.
I think the billion-dollar question is gonna be for the city of Shafter is, when we implement something like this is, do you want it all in the core city? Or do you want to share the love with Gossamer Northern Shafter? So that's gonna be the billion-dollar question.
Yeah, and that would be it. I mean, we have a DA, we have, you know, they have vested rights on the Gossamer Grove
they
specific
would
plan that
know it.
we would need to consult with Marco on that, but definitely on the other area, you know, that don't already have vesting rights on their maps and whatnot. Like
Well,
Crystal
over
Lakes
the
Heritage
future that
Rights.
will have,
Mhm.
because like you said, others, that's part of the outreach, others will have to be involved in it to offer that. And we get control of it. That's the best part. whatever control we have. Huh?
All right, well, I'm going to move on
Thank you,
unless
President.
there's any other questions. Hearing none, I'll go ahead and move on. We're now going to shift gears from the housing element update to the environmental justice element. The the environmental justice element is an element that was mandated for the city due to our due to various things, but we drafted a environmental justice element in November of 2020. We included meeting with the environmental justice group, healthcare providers, and faith-based organizations as part of that draft. As you know, last year, the city council considered, actually before I even showed up in May 2021, whether to adopt the environmental justice element. Just to let you know, it also addressed some AQ or air quality policies as part of that element. Based on the feedback from the public and the council, the draft environmental justice element was referred back to staff. Since then, staff has determined that the potential environmental impacts of the draft environmental justice element are such that there could be potentially significant and unavoidable impacts, and therefore a program environmental impact report is required. The previous iteration of the environmental justice element used a lesser CEQA document called a mitigated neg deck. It was drafted but never finalized. So with that, we're going to talk a little bit more about the program EIR, but I wanted to sort of let you know that that's one of the determinations of staff, was that this environmental justice element requires a document, a CEQA document that is more than what we were anticipating last year. And just to let you know that state law doesn't provide a due date for the environmental justice element, just a trigger for its preparation. So I'm going to go on to a program EIR. As I said, we determined that the environmental justice element requires a program EIR. What is a program EIR? A program EIR is like any other EIR in that it discloses the environmental impacts of a project or a set of actions. In this case, it's a set of actions. It's not an individual project, which would be called a project level EIR. It's a program EIR, where from there, the EIR you could tier off as you develop projects based on, as you develop project level projects, you could tier off this EIR and utilize it for future development. So like I said, the program EIR may be prepared on a series of actions that can be characterized as one large project, such as an environmental justice element. To sort of give a little wrinkle to this, wonderful company anticipates a project level EIR to expand an industrial park west of Santa Fe Avenue. There has been no application submitted to date, but Wonderful has definitely made the city aware that they're pursuing and anticipating this option, and that they will be submitting an application to do a large general plan amendment zone change on ag land to turn it into industrial, to expand their existing Wonderful industrial project. Because of the size of that project, they're going to also need an environmental impact report for that general plan amendment zone change. So there is an opportunity here for the city to maybe have some cost savings on a future program EIR by using some of Wonderful's what's called cumulative analysis. The analysis of not only their project, but the cumulative projects that are in the project area, including an environmental justice element update or rather environmental justice element that we're preparing currently. With that, the staff is recommending that we as a city should at some point, once that application is submitted, to formally meet with Wonderful to discuss timing of their environmental impact report, and also to discuss the extent to which their cumulative analysis can be used in a future city program EIR. And there's going to be more to this program EIR here in a moment. But first, I want to talk about the general plan update. Every city and county has a general plan, which is basically a vision document or a local blueprint of how the community would like to see itself developed over a certain amount of time, generally about 20 years. It is a long-term vision for the future. There are a number of state mandated elements for a general plan. which includes land use, circulation, housing, conservation, open space, noise, and safety. Since we are an SB 1000 community, we have a few other required elements, which is a revision to our, is an air quality element and an environmental justice element. This is what is driving the need for the environmental justice element, is the fact that we are considered an SB 1000 community, and therefore an environmental justice element is required by state law. And also with that, then state law requires that as you do a general plan update, that you ultimately update your zoning ordinance to be consistent with that vision document. Currently, the general plan program EIR that we base a lot of our CEQA on, we tear off of that document quite a bit here in the city, is over 17 years old. It was last developed in 2005, finalized in 2005. Since then, there's been a lot of changes to CEQA law that includes the need to study a number of additional environmental issue areas that are not talked about in our current EIR. For example, there is no energy, greenhouse gas emissions, tribal cultural resources, or wildfire discussions in our EIR that are now required by current state law. And also, the general plan update does not include the future possible WIP expansion west of Santa Fe. So here's the second policy discussion. Both the EJ element and future general plan update require a program EIR. So the question is, should the city update the general plan and include the environmental justice element as a part of the update and then environmentally clear both under one EIR? Or do we prepare the environmental justice element and then the general plan update separately under two EIRs? There are costs and costs and problems with both of those. Bifurcating them, you can focus in on just the general plan update and the environmental justice element EIR, and there's less of a chance that one part of that makes the other part go off the rails. The other part of it, though, is that if you do two environmental or two EIRs, your costs are going to be a lot more. Generally, an EIR for a rule of thumb for a general EIR or for a EIR itself is about $250,000 per EIR for the amount of analysis that is necessary. So if you were to do one EIR, we'll say it's about $250,000. If you were to do two EIRs, we've now doubled the cost to $250,000. I'm of the mind that if we're gonna do it, and since the age of the general plan update or the general plan itself is so old, it might be time to just open up the general plan again. And we can talk later about what that exactly means, but then basically include all of the analysis we've already done for the environmental justice element, just include it as part of a general plan update rather than doing the two separately.
And you take advantage of what Wonderful is doing too.
Correct.
Right. I mean, it'd be foolish not to.
So
Just
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Just to add, Mayor Council, Planning Commission, is that not only the economies of scale because of the costs associated, but also too, there isn't a timeline in which we have to have the environmental justice document adopted. And if there were, then it would be time sensitive, but there's nothing, because we're so close to when we would need to be updating the general plan anyway, is that it would be in our interest to go ahead and just combine the two and do one document altogether for both the EJ and the general plan. There's nothing that precludes us from opening up the general plan sooner to start the process. We'd still be working under the current adopted general plan, but we would be able to start the environmental work with that, before it expires. So I think that is, I don't think, for the staff level, we believe that that's the best approach to maximize our cost, minimize our cost, but be more inclusive, not only with the EJ document, but as Steve has mentioned, with Wonderful's proposed expansion, and capitalize on that. And they'll be doing their own studies that we would be able to not necessarily share data, but be able to kind of cross-reference their data with ours in terms of what we're talking about. So.
And just to let you know, I conferred with Dennis Fiddler, our building official. He actually says we have, and thank God we've done it. We had the foresight to do it. We have impounded about $650,000 towards some sort of an update to the general plan. So it's not like I'm going to be coming in asking for $500,000 here out of the general fund. We do have impounded funds already available to us. And that made me feel pretty good because I wasn't sure if we had that sort of fee. So basically, every time a builder comes in, there's a little bit of a fee by square footage, I believe it is, correct? By square footage? No, a percentage of the valuation. And so for example, I think a 1 million square foot building that's coming in, and we're going to get $81,000 in fee towards the general plan EIR. So or general plan update that includes an EIR component. So that makes me feel a little bit better that at least we got some money in the till and we thought about that. So again, not something that we need to make a decision on tonight, but something that sort of generates your thoughts, give you something to chew on. And we will of course be bringing this back at a later date. I just wanted to sort of tee this up tonight to get you guys thinking about it.
Well, and it's probably worthy to remember too, the EJ element had to be pulled aside or dropped or whatever, because they were forcing us into an action item because of their involvement in the whole process. And all we can hope for is that that's sort of leveled off and we don't have that threat behind us on that too. And we can just incorporate it with the other and get it done and move on. I mean, because it didn't have a due date was one way that we could pull back, but we lost 250,000 on that because we had already paid out all that money and we were gonna have to redo it. So,
Well, I think that 250,000 was well used. We're just
Oh,
going to have
it's
to
right.
repackage it. Yeah.
sure, that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah. And the cost of the mitigated negative declaration was probably something that
Mhm.
will be scrapped because environmental documents get long in the tooth pretty quick. So, but I don't think it's a complete loss. I mean, there's a lot of good information there. There was a lot of back and forth, a lot of, engaging the community that I think is very valuable and that can be utilized and
It wasn't a
repackaged.
negative report. I thought we did a nice job with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we did a very good job with it. I just think repackaging it as part of the general plan update, I think would allow continuity between the elements, including the environmental justice and the general plan. You can make sure that those two are talking to each other a little bit more effectively as one
Much
document.
better. Yeah, much better.
So anyway, I don't need any answers. I just want you guys to mull it over. That's all. Do you need to?
Yeah, Mayor Proud and the council members, due to a previous obligation, I'm asked to be dismissed. And I don't think there's any action items for us, but doing so, I'm going to leave no quorum for the planning commission. So we're going to need to entertain a motion to adjourn the planning commission meeting. We could do that. Thank you. Thank you. Do we need a roll call that? All right. All in favor? Yeah. Aye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Franz.
Yes, thank you very much.
So I'll go ahead and we're getting through it here. Last discussion item. And now we're shifting gears from big policy documents to what we talked about a month ago. We're going to talk about those ordinance revisions. As you know, it was a zone code amendment 2217 that was presented to you guys. There was a public hearing on September 20th of 2022. We opened the hearing and then continued to a date certain of December 6, 2022. Just to refresh your memory, the reasons for the revisions were in response to changes in state law regarding accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units, as well as landscaping. Also in order to be consistent with the California Building Code. And there are also a few building official requests. We'll go ahead and move on here. Again, this is just what the changes in state law are driving the need for changes to our zoning ordinance regarding ADUs and JADUs. This just sort of gives you a description of what an ADU and a JADU is by state law. And I brought this up last time and I won't rehash it again. You guys can go ahead and reread that if you'd like. Again, there are changes in state law. Namely SB 13, AB 3182, There's AB 68, AB 881, which allows by right ADUs in residential zones. It excludes off-street parking requirements. It excludes minimum lot and coverage and owner occupancy requirements, and it can include manufactured homes. And then actually today, our city attorney made me aware of two new laws that have just been passed regarding ADUs. There are two new laws. Let me see if I can find. There's Assembly Bill 2221 rather, and Senate Bill 897. Basically, there are some changes to height limitations. Local agencies must now allow ADUs taller than 16 feet in the following circumstances if they are within a half mile of a major transportation stop. And they can be up to 20 feet if the rest of the buildings are also 20 feet. They also say that if there are ADUs on a lot, if you want to do detached ADUs on a lot with existing multifamily, the ADU may be up to 18 feet by right, regardless of how close it is to a transit system. And this is one you're going to love, because we're going to talk a little bit more about front yard setbacks. There's part of that law. Front yard setbacks must yield to the extent necessary to be able to construct an 800 square foot ADU with 4-foot side and rear yard setbacks. Basically, you can encroach into your front yard setback with an ADU by right. It gets rid of front yard setbacks. And then there are a few other sort of nuanced things, like you needing a demolition. You have to do a demolition permit concurrently with an ADU application. If you deny an ADU, you need to provide a full set of comments. And there are a few other sort of nuanced things that I won't get into here now. But what we're going to do as part of that December 6th meeting is we're going to update our ADU, the draft ADU changes to the zoning ordinance. And we're going to include these also as part of it. We'll make it very clear what new changes are being considered in that draft when it comes to you in December. So pros and cons, really with ADUs and JADUs, pro is you're complying with state law. The con is that you're not compliant with state law. There really is no other pros or cons to it from staff's perspective. The second one we talked about really briefly was the changes to landscaping law. Again, I'm not going to get too much into it. Basically saying that you can't prohibit drought tolerant landscaping, synthetic grass, artificial turf on residential properties. But you can impose reasonable restrictions as long as it doesn't substantially increase the cost of installing, effectively prohibit this installation, or significantly impede installation. Again, pros are it's compliant with state law. The cons are really none. We have to comply with state law. Moving on to California Building Code consistency. As you remember, Title 17 is not consistent with California Building Code for minimum distances between accessory structures and residential zones. Currently, we have a 10-foot minimum distance between existing and proposed accessory structures. The California Building Code has allowances for reduced minimum distance requirements to less than 10 feet. And for example, just due to the geometry of many of the lots in Gossamer Grove, because of this minimum distance between accessory and primary, some people can't even get a patio in their backyard, or they can't even get a small shed in their backyard due to this requirement. And it's more stringent than the California Building Code. For our part, the staff thinks that the pros are that the ordinance makes the ordinance consistent with the California Building Code. It provides greater flexibility to owners, and there really are no cons to it, considering that we are just going to be consistent with California Building Code. Yeah, here's one that I think was a little bit of contention at our last meeting. The second building request was regarding driveways, essentially allowing RVs, boats, trailers, etc., within a residential driveway, provided it does not encroach in the right of way, and that these sort of vehicles are maintained and licensed. Staff did a survey in the past, and we found that most nearby municipalities either allow these sorts of things in the front yard setback, or they do not enforce the ordinance. And from staff's perspective, the requirement becomes burdensome for code enforcement. And with that, I would defer to Dennis if he would like to add anything else to that.
Yeah, I can add, we're gonna, after looking into it further here in the complaints that we received on social media, I think we're gonna, hopefully, get your guys' decision on, since we have a full-time code enforcement officer now in play, maybe collecting data and, bringing this back at a much later date to support what we do, so we can take, kind of a similar stance to what we had in the past, a reactive stance, not actively go out and find the violations, but we can, if we get complaints, we'll address it, and then over the next 6-12 months, we can get data and bring back to you, as well as create protocol for, I think we're a little bit unprepared of having data programs, so we can have programs in front of us that give us the ability, there's other jurisdictions that give us the ability of, hey, you can park recreational vehicles that are under a certain size, over a certain size. You can park them in the driveway only if they're parallel to the driveway, because we've had, the first one that came in kind of diagonal. It looked more like what I would say, like a RV park or, like a camp. And so if you're parking it, parallel to your driveway, perpendicular to the house, I think it looks normal, like you park the car. Those are just things that we have in front of us. We can have size limits, height limits, location requirements. We can have permits. So I think we can put together a few programs and bring back to you guys later date with data.
So that one is being pulled from the December 6th hearing then? Okay. Thank you.
Just for the record, we nodded, so it's, yes, we will be making those modifications to the item that's coming back to you in December, pulling this back from the proposed changes.
So, just to let you know, kind of staff was asked to give pros and cons, and our pros are it's greater flexibility to owners. It reduces the burden on code enforcement, but the cons are there are aesthetics concerns. Some people think it's ugly. And so,
We not only think it is ugly because people abuse it.
okay.
And that's what it all comes down to. I mean, if you could trust everybody that they would do it the right way and make sure that it's maintained, but it isn't. We've already experienced this.
So yeah, we're gonna go ahead and strike that from the December 6th meeting, and we'll come back with a bit like Dennis said, a bit more data on this, and we can have a discussion just about this specifically and really get into the weeds about it. The other one we had a discussion about last time was again another building request regarding corner lots. So essentially right now we were requesting that we have a 20-foot front yard setback on reverse corner lots in front of garages only to allow parking in front without encroaching in the right of way. Currently the setback is 10 feet on corner and reverse corner lots. And this results in vehicles encroaching in the right of way when parked in a driveway in front of a garage. Just to remind you what a corner and reverse corner lot look like. This kind of gives you a sense of what we're talking about. If you notice the red truck sort of encroaching into the sidewalk. Here's another example, again, sort of this diagonal white truck, again, encroaching into the sidewalk. And with that, I think I'll go ahead and, do you have anything else to add to that, Dennis?
I can speak on it a little bit. We're not asking for a deeper setback for the house or the primary structure. It's only the garage. And I think our ordinance speaks that the driveway is being used to actually a pathway to the garage. But in reality, everyone uses the driveway to park. So if we don't have that kind of deeper standard of 20 feet, potentially they're going to park over the sidewalk. It's not going to happen very often. So either way, I think we're good with the direction. I think for years we've had kind of a pencil note in our zoning ordinance. It's probably an opportune time to probably make it 20 feet if you guys feel.
What is the white truck right now? What is that? Like 15?
I don't know. It's in there,
Okay.
so I just grabbed it.
Oh, okay. So that's not 20. So
That
20
looks like 10.
10. Okay, so 20 will be actually where the truck will be out of the easement of the sidewalk, right? The public
Right
sidewalk.
away.
Okay, the driveway. Okay.
This affects new build, not old build, I'm assuming.
Correct. It would be legal. Under an old zone, you would consider legal non-conforming. Yeah. And
You're
let's
getting
say,
ready
and
to
let's
say something else. Hold on, Dennis, you were getting ready to say something else there. I saw that.
I was just going to bring up we spoke about like if something burned, if something's legal non-conforming and it burned, so if you had an old garage, a whole structure burned and you had this, would it apply? I think technically yes, but that's few and far beyond. I don't know that we've ever even seen that here in Shafter in like 24 years, so it's a small fraction of the time that would happen, and I think we could have some discretion or a note to allow it if it was legally built too.
So just over, you meant, so if that garage will burn down and then they have to reconstruct it, but it'll be a 20-foot setback at that time?
Yes, that's
Okay.
the ordinance is written. If
Okay.
we have something that was not built in accordance with code and it burns down, they have to replace it in accordance with the code.
But let's say for some reason there was there's a ADU that didn't burn and you literally could not move. You can do a variance and you can make the findings that geographically, there's constraints that can't allow us to enforce the 20-foot setback. And then you would just give them a variance. But that would be, you said, very few and far between. Corner and reverse corner lots that have this kind of driveway setup aren't very common here in Shafter. So we're talking about something that may be a concern once every 10 years, maybe, or I mean, like Dennis said, in 24 years, he's really not had that concern. So it's a very remote possibility, but there are certainly ways through the variance process that we can work around it if they've got a legitimate constraint to building it to modern code. If we don't have any other questions, I'll go ahead and move on. Again, I just gonna kind of give you the pros and cons. It gets parked vehicles in driveways and out of the public right of way. Garage replaced, like we said, garage replacements may not be able to meet the new standard. There is the variance process. There is possibly the cost to processing a variance in that off case. We could also build into it that if, it's no fault of their own, act of God, we just waive any sort of processing of a zone variance to allow them to build it as they had built it before, so that it becomes legal non-conforming again. This is one more building request. It's essentially coaches that are along basically Lerdo Highway and Santa Fe, generally around the airport or the industrial park. Basically, we have a sort of a buffer requirement that you can't have those sort of portable commercial coaches within 1,500 feet of these arterial roadways. It doesn't give the staff a lot of discretion. A lot of times, maybe it's within that 1,500 foot, but it's blocked by an existing building that you're never going to see. So why are we imposing the 1,500 foot buffer setback? Is it supposed to be for aesthetic reasons so that you do not see these buildings? What we're asking for is a little bit more leeway for the planning director to be able to sort of make case by case determinations on whether to adhere to that 1,500 foot buffer or waive it and allow closer buffers to those arterial roadways.
This is just to allow we're calling them commercial coaches, a bus.
No, it would be your temporary buildings. Your sort of,
Modular building.
yes.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Okay. So
We call them coaches in the zoning ordinance. So
when I see the word coach, I think RV. I don't think modular office space is what it should be, as a modular building or an office space of sorts. So theoretically, the building that we have sitting here is out of compliance.
no, because it's not along those arterials. It's generally arterials that are closer to WIP and then closer to the airport.
Santa Fe Way, we're talking the main Santa Fe, right?
Yes. Up here, this is now Central Valley Highway. And so we're talking south of,
Narrative.
correct.
South of Lerdo, west of Santa Fe. Okay. That's an interesting area. I would like to see that on a map, actually.
Okay.
That's a really interesting area and why we're limiting it just to that area versus all the other areas that we have in town. And are we talking about, so when we say the word permanent, that is a building of this magnitude? Are we still calling, I know it's not in the same zone, but a building of this, are we still calling this temporary? Are we talking churches who install modular, or are we still calling that temporary? What are we considering? Permanent actually has a COO?
Yes, it'd be something that's not temporary for like construction or something.
Okay.
Yeah, our building considered out of compliance. Yeah, we're looking at that. So just so you know, we see a lot of them out at like the airport that are
Mhm.
further, maybe it's got, we have one right now that they're trying to get in and out of the press conference. But they're back so far and there's so much other stuff in front of it that their question is, you're really concerned with what's gonna happen on this property? It's kind of a low frame modular building behind the street fence, behind other buildings. It won't be seen from the highway at all. And so it just makes some sense to have some discretion on if it's already screened by something else, do we really need the 1,500 foot number? But I think Chad, sorry.
You're fine. Please.
Where it came in was, the mini storage facility on Elm and across from Generals. Remember they had a
Mhm.
modular building.
It's an office.
Yeah, but they only had 5 years, and after that, we actually made them remove it. They built a very similar structure that essentially looks just like the manufactured house, but it's a stick frame. So it's legal now, but we came in with a standard after that to say, hey, and I think that's where it hits the Murdo Highway. Intersection, so I believe we have an ordinance that gives you a map.
Yeah, yeah.
Can we change the words from commercial coach, please? Because I feel like Tim McGraw just drove in here for a concert. I'd really appreciate that.
Sure, we can do that for you.
Thank you.
All right, we're almost done here. Let me, let's get through this. So, again, pros provides staff greater flexibility. It's business friendly. The cons are there may be some aesthetics concerns, but again, that'd be on the discretion of the planning director to try to ameliorate those aesthetics concerns on a case by case basis. And with that, guys, that ends my presentation. If you have any questions, please, feel free to ask them now. Like I said, we're going to, it sounds to me from my direction from what I'm hearing from the council and commission is that we'll get rid of or we'll eliminate the front yard setbacks, RVs for December 6th. And is there anything else you may want us to just, and I'm saying this because I really needed to get that ADU into effect in our zoning ordinance. And especially now in light of the fact that I'm going to have to add a little wrinkle based on this new state law, and I got to get it into effect before December. If these other things are going to hang that up, I might as well just pull those out now, allow those things to go forward, and then we can bring back these more contentious issues at a later date. Obviously, I'm going to take out the driveway one, and we'll talk more about that after Dennis obtains some more data for us to analyze. Is there anything else that maybe you may want me to pull out of that?
Did I notice that in these ADUs, there was a note about modular homes? Are we
Yeah,
adding that?
No, that by right, the state is saying you're allowed to have modular homes as an ADU.
As an ADU or as a home? And I know that sounds one and the same, but a builder builds a home or a builder has a lot with 50 modular structures. And then that just now gets you into this modular commercial coach situation that we just got done talking about.
For this, it's the ADUs. The other residents would be considered the primary residence or not the accessory dwelling to it. So the primary residence, we still have the ability to make a stick building. But if it's an ADU, state law is requiring us to allow, modular buildings.
Is a C-train considered a module?
It is if I put an air conditioner in it.
Okay.
It is?
At this point, I mean, what's the limit at that point here, guys?
Yeah, and just so you know that the press company on Larry came back to us and said, if I can't do the manufactured home, I'll just do a storage container.
Well,
And our ordinance doesn't really define that you can't do a storage container. At the end of the day, the storage container would not look as attractive as the manufactured.
To answer your question, there's a modular manufacturer in Bakersfield who has taken old C trains and now converted them over to office spaces, restrooms, things for college campuses, and they're just reutilizing what's there. So theoretically, yes, a C train can be converted into a modular space. Can you imagine in the same place that the RV, or the storage facilities at, hey, can't have your modular coach here, but across the street at his residence, can have 3 of them. We're good.
ADUs, I know they've been, in the past, we've had a lot of, kind of social media, kind of vocal about, hey, is there necessary parking? What's going on with them, but as they're being allowed, some of the jurisdictions are actually kind of proactively going out and creating their own design. So I know the city of Fresno has 5 different designs, so it's kind of an over-the-counter process where you can go in there, pick one of their plans. So they went out to the consultant, had the 5 plans designed structurally. You can kind of mark up your site plan, the floor plan, pick the plan they have, and it's a much easier process. And the reason I bring that up is, and kind of food for thought is the ADUs can count, it seems like, toward the arena numbers. So that may be a piece to getting our low arena numbers up if there's a chance.
And just to let you know, City Manager Gonzalez actually said, maybe in the interest of, it sounds like, maybe a little more thought is something that the council would want. Maybe we just bring the ADU component that we introduced last time back for your consideration, and we can continue to work with you on crafting language that you feel comfortable with, and then eventually bring back some or all of the rest of the requests to the council. Of course, vetted through the planning commission again at a later date, but to focus our energies at this point on just the ADU and JADU, and probably the landscaping is a very simple change as well. Maybe those 2, and then we can, after the beginning of the year, focus in more on these other items and build some more confidence and in that we're meeting what you guys would like to see.
By the law.
Yeah, I think that's a wise move to go to.
Okay.
Just consensus from the rest of you.
Okay,
know
so
that-
we need to adjourn. We need to adjourn our meeting. And it is 5:22. We need
Make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Okay.
I'll second.